This is Flick,
This is Rudy.
and this week we are once again firing up the flux capacitor and going back to the year 1968 for our Faves and Raves.
We're doing faves and raves of this is the first time we're doing for a year that neither of us were alive for. So this is strictly archival material. We had to work a little harder here. Although let's be honest, the music of 1968 has been on the radio for us our entire lives. So I think we know what we're doing. I
Yeah,
think you'll like our list. I think we did well.
yeah, we might not have been alive at the time, but we know a thing or two about the music that came out in that year.
Indeed, we did. It's actually great. We're going to do our favorite songs from the year and our favorite albums from the year. It is jam-packed 1968.
That's next on the Left of the Dial podcast.
Thank you, Richard Shirk. That is our friend, Richard Shirk. And the Time Worm, it is our theme. We are at episode 62 of the Left of the Dial podcast. Very excited this week, Mr. Flick. It's our last normal show for the year before we get into our year-end countdowns and our Christmas extravaganza. It's our last normal show. We're covering a very special year this year. Mr. Flick, what year are we covering?
Well. First of all, I think either all of our shows are normal or none of them are normal. I don't know. Well, but what you're referring to is in the coming weeks we'll be looking back on the year 2020 and our favorites from the year, and then we'll also have a Christmas show that we're working on for you. But before we do that, we're in the year 2020, but we'll be going back to the year 1968 for tonight's show. 68 is a year that has a lot in common with the year 2020, and that wasn't such a pleasant time to be, at least to be an American anyway. It was a very tumultuous time in our country's history.
It was hard to be a human in 1968 on many, many fronts. I don't necessarily believe that like bad times are always liable for creating good. In 1968, I think you could make a case that trying times made for excellence, and we are going to spend some quality time talking about them this week. Talk a little bit about how we're going to format this, Mr. Flick.
Okay, so we've done a couple of shows where we've gone back to the years 1993 and 1980, and what we do is we talk about songs that we like from those years. The main focus of the show is really the 12 albums that we chose as our top 12 from the year, but we also will spend a good deal of time talking about the songs we like from that year.
Yeah, and I think for the songs in my list, I basically want to just cover some highlights from each genre. It's not really a countdown per se. I do have a favorite song from 1968, but I'm not sure we share that. And I'm not. Did you do rankings and songs, or are these
No,
all honorable mentions?
Yeah, no, I don't even know how to begin to rank songs. It's for me, it's tough enough to rank albums because my order of things is going to change with the wind. Like I'll maybe have the same 12 on my list, as my top 12, but the order that I have them in might be different. So with songs, that's really just chaos. And I can't try to rein that in.
So, like you say, doing firm and heavy rankings here isn't what we're doing with the songs for 1968. There was a ton of great music in 1968. There is one song that stands out for me. I do think it's special. I think it's especially good, especially important to just American culture and American popular music. It's Otis Redding, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, which was released in 1968. I think it was his only number one top 40 song. but it was released after his death, and it's one of the sadder parts of the story is that Otis Redding didn't actually get to live to see just what an impact that record made. And I can't say this one way or another, but I have to think that was a number one record either way. That's speculation, but I have to think the record is certainly deserving of being a number one record. Not that that's a merit-based argument all the time, but I gotta think it would have scored, it been the biggest hit of his career. And it's just one of those great songs. I never tire of listening to it. And I just feel like I can pretty confidently state it's one of the best songs ever made. So it's certainly got to be one of the best songs ever made in the year it was made.
Yeah. I mean, I love Otis, so there isn't really. I don't think I've ever had anything even slightly negative to say about any of his work. I just think he's one of the greatest ever. Uh, yeah, Dock of the Bay is really interesting, and it's something that really makes you wonder where his career would have gone, because it shows, him taking on some folk influences. He was always going to be a great soul singer, but it shows more maturity in his songwriting, and more dimensions that he was taking on. And unfortunately, that's the end of the story.
Yeah. It's a real Stax record too. It's got the horns, it's got that guitar sound, it has all the elements that make it familiar, but you're right, it is a departure in some sense. And frankly, I can't think of a better whistle part, or a human whistling. I can't think of a better human whistling part in any music anywhere. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel like it's special in the history of music. It's first among equals, let's say, for 1968.
yeah, and you mentioned the Steve Cropper guitar parts. Yeah, I mean it does retain the Stax sound, but also just shows, like Otis was just becoming more diverse, and it would have been interesting to see where his career ended up. Even if it was just for maybe 5 more years, it would have been interesting to see where things went.
So I do think there were a couple other good soul records that we should probably chat about, or at least soul artists. I know you have some of these on your list, so if you want to crosstalk them, we can. But Chess Records had a pretty good year. I'm going to talk about one of their albums on the album side, but Etta James' "Tell Mama" came out in 1968, and again, Etta James has a in 1968 was a good year for her. Maybe it's just a sentimental thing. I love "Tell Mama." I go back to it all the time. The horns are incredible. The guitar part's incredible. Her vocal performance is incredible, and the songwriting's there. So great year for Chess Records.
Okay, yeah, and as far as that album goes, that album, the Etta James album, also had "I'd Rather Go Blind,"
Yep.
which that's actually my favorite off of that album. That's a killer song.
Yeah, she was great. Let me just I'll run through my list here quick. I thought the sort of dino rock, the old sludge stuff, the Blue Cheers, Summertime Blues. Go ahead.
Well, wait a minute. Were we going to discuss soul?
Or... Oh yeah. I'm sorry. We can go back before.
Oh, okay. Because yeah, like I said before, soul is my comfort food. So I have a lot of soul favorites from the year 1968. One that earlier in the year came along when we did our Stax B-sides and rarities show, and that is the Staple Singers B-side "Stay With Us." That's that song has been a big one on my list all year, so I had to include that here. Sly and the Family Stones, "Dance to the Music," also came out in '68. That was a close contender for my top 12, but didn't quite make it as an album. But the song has to make my songs list. Motown stuff. Marvin Gaye's "I Heard It Through the Grapevine" was '68. definitely one of the top songs. Like I'm not ranking them, but I Heard It Through the Grapevine is definitely one of the top songs of the year for sure.
Absolutely. That's one of the top of all time as well. Although I think that's a cover in his version, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Um, I just want to throw in as a curio, Diana Ross with the Temptations, "I'm Gonna Make You Love Me" came out in 1968, as did Love Child, which is I maybe a little bit of a curiosity from a historical point of view, but I've always thought was a pretty good little song.
Yeah, and other Motown things that are on my list: Temptations, "I Wish It Would Rain," Stevie Wonder's "For Once in My Life." Let me see what else is. I don't know if I have any more Motown on my list. Other soul songs: James Brown's "I Got the Feeling," or "I Got the Feeling." Let me see.
Say It Loud, "I'm Black and I'm Proud" came out. On a reserve talking about it because it came out on a great Christmas album that he made in 1968. But you're gonna have a hard time, Like again, it's a matter of taste. But "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud" is that's not just some historical curiosity. It's a great record too. You know what I mean? It's a great record.
Yeah, more stuff from the Stax label: Booker T and the MGs, "Time Is Tight,"
That's a great one.
Johnny Taylor's "Who's Making Love." That pretty much covers the soul entries on my list, and it's a pretty big portion of my list.
Yeah, it was a great year for soul records. You know, Forcing things too much into one genre or another is probably not going to do anybody any particular favors. So I don't necessarily want to try to shoehorn the music into genres, but it is the easiest way to sort of hop around and cover the highlights. So are you cool with moving on from soul?
Yeah.
All right, so I do want to go back and talk about like what I would just call like the dinosaur rock or the like the proto heavy metal. I think two great cover records came out in 1968 that need to be just given a passing moment here. Steppenwolf's cover of Axton, I think Hoyt Axton's "The Pusher," and Blue Cheer's "Summertime Blues" cover of Eddie Cochran come out in 1968. And we were talking about this before the show. I don't want to hit this point too hard, but like those are a type of cover that's kind of emerging at that time. Like there's always been covers. Lots of bands have always done other artists' songs, but a lot of times those are done as sort of products to sort of fill out an album. They were done for as much for marketing as they were for sort of artistic gratification. I don't think you could say that about either of these arrangements. Like this is really where the sort of cross genre cover really starts coming into its own. And I don't know, I like the original lyrics of "The Pusher" a little better than Steppenwolf's, but that guitar sound and just that gigantic descending note that they play, just that gigantic slide, just incredible. And then the opposite on Blue Cheer "Summertime Blues," where they just do that incredible build right in the middle of the record. You can just like hear the equipment literally ready to just like explode if you're listening on headphones. It's great. I love those two records. And this really is the year when that sort of nasty, trashy old stuff, the old sludge really started to come into its own. I'm excited by that.
Okay. Well, on the subject of, I guess we're not genre bouncing, but maybe on the subject of sludgy stuff.
Yes.
Uh, I have "Hush" by Deep Purple on my list. I don't know what else really fits in there.
Well, we could jump right into because You by the Doors comes out, White Room by comes out, Burden and the Animals, Mach 2, Sky Pilot, maybe not everybody's favorite, but that's a fantastic song too. Like it was a pretty good year for the dinosaurs too. Manfred Mann's Mighty Quinn, and then I think you get into the psychedelic stuff a little, Pretty Things and Zombies, that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, those things are things I'll cover more on my albums list. I mean, yeah, we'll unfortunately we'll be doing some backtracking when I get to my albums list for Otis Redding as well. Spoiler alert. Um, okay, so I don't know. I'll just give off a couple of songs from my list in no particular order. Creedence Clearwater Revival had their debut album in '68. Uh, I originally thought this is probably one that ends up making my list. It didn't actually really come close. That first album is not as good as I had remembered it being. So I do like Porterville quite a bit, and I chose that for my songs list. But the album is not quite as good as the albums that came after it. Buffalo Springfield, uh, On the Way Home is the from last time around. On the Way Home made my list. Birds, going back and Wasn't Born to Follow on my songs list. I may have more to say about the Birds later. And Towns Van Sant had his debut album that year, and the album not really good enough. Well, as far as songs goes, yes, that album would have been good enough to make my top 12. The arrangements were not befitting Towns Van Sant though, and so I put "Waiting Around to Die" on my songs list, but most of these songs anyway were recorded in better arrangements later on in Towns' career.
It was not a bad year for country because Mama Tried by Merle Haggard came out, which is one of the all-time great of greats. Fist City by Loretta Lynn, another all-time great of greats. And then I didn't put it on my list, but if you can dig it up, Skip a Rope by Henson Cargill is another one of those like records that sort of encapsulated its time, but is surprisingly relevant today. There was some decent country music during 1960. I'm not going to say it's Tammy Wynette's "Take Me to Your World," I think came out. That's all right. There's some other stuff that's good, but the Henson Cargill, Skip a Rope, Fist City, and Mama Tried, those three songs, and Harper Valor PTA, having all those in one year, it had to be a pretty good year.
Okay, well, a big one you left out there was "Only Daddy They'll Walk the Line" by Waylon
Yeah,
Jennings.
yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, that's a huge one to me. And Mama Tried is also on my list. Uh, I don't have as much country on my list, I don't think. I think that's kind of it for me. Well,
Yeah,
I'll this isn't necessarily. I'll put. I'll just throw in Sir Douglas Quintet with Mendocino into this part of my list. Not really country, but Doug Somm is somebody who definitely is a genre bender. So I'll just put him into the country portion of my list.
yeah, it does also some other good. See 7 inch. It's a, the Pops Cry Like a Baby came out in 1968, which I do think is one of Alex Chilton's best vocal performances. The sitar, I don't. There are some people who don't like the little sitar guitar effect on it. I love it. I think the bass line's great. I love the little organ part in there. I think it's just one of their best records, Cry Like a Baby. Tip
Yeah,
top for
Cry
me.
Like a Baby is a good one. And I as far it's funny you mentioned the vocal performance because my favorite vocal of it, I Cry Like a Baby was on a K-Tel CD
Yes.
compilation, and they had a re-recording of it where basically the backing track was the same as the original, but Alex Chilton had re-recorded the vocal, and it's more like what he sounds like during his big star days. So that's always been my favorite version of "Cry Like a Baby," actually.
Nice. I have a couple more nuggets to throw in, and then I've spoken my piece. Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart's "I Wonder What She's Doing Tonight" came out in 19. And I worked at an oldies radio station, like playing 60s stuff when I was in my 20s, which is not the easiest job in the world, but that was always one I loved. I very rarely did I keep the music loud when the song started, but that was one I always did. And then one of my favorite baby boom cringy nuggets of all time, "Friend and Lover," "Reach Out in the Darkness," with the woman singing that she thinks it's so groovy that people are starting to get together. That's all time awesome. It's one of my favorite vocal performances. It's a slice of like hippie BS. But boy, I would suffer through a lot of hippie BS, all that. So "Friend and Lover," "Reach Out in the Darkness" definitely goes on the list. I know you have "Pretty Things" on your album list, so I don't want to hit them too sort of fits that psychedelic. Really only could have come out in the late 60s. Then other than that, I don't know if I have too much other from the pop. The last thing I'd mention is in the jazz world, there were some interesting albums that year and interesting songs. Miles in the Sky, the Miles Davis record, I think he put out a couple of records in 1968, but that was his first electric album, Miles in the Sky. I'm not the biggest Miles Davis fan, but the song Paraphernalia from that album is great. Albert Ayler sort of let jazz go and started to go into more of a rock direction, which I don't think was very commercially successful for him. The new Grass album came out, but the song New Ghosts, even though the musical part at the back is not as great, the little vocal intro he does is haunting. It's fantastic. And if you don't know Albert Ayler, you should really give him a chance. And then my last one, and this is just a bit of a curiosity, but everybody should hear it. The Peter Brötzmann Quintet, I think it is. No, Octet. Peter Brötzmann Octet in 1968 released Machine Gun, which is one of the most extreme records I have ever heard. And I've gone out of my way to listen to some of the. I've even read the book Songs in the Key of Z. Like I do like the out stuff, and this is a pretty extreme one, but it's important. And Peter Brötzmann did a lot of other interesting stuff, especially if you're a saxophone fan. So I had to put it on there. I don't have to listen to all 17 minutes of it, but you get the point about 5 seconds in. It's a very interesting record. So that's what I got for jazz.
Okay. But you have more songs on your list yet,
Oh,
right?
sure.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm just kind of go at random here. Toots and the Maytals with Pressure Drop, a great song from 1968. Bee Gees, Got to Get a Message to You, and I started a joke on my song list. Cream's White Room. The album is a bit up and down for me, but White Room is undeniably great. Big Brother and the Holding Company, another piece of my heart. Let me see. Oh, and it should mention, the Beatles, of course, had singles in addition to any album that you or I might discuss later on.
Yeah.
Hey Jude, on my songs list, as well as any other thing.
I have
And
Revolution. The B-side, you gotta, I mean, I don't know,
yeah,
was there ever a better 7-inch single put out than Hey Jude with Revolution as the B-side? Is that the best 7-inch single of all time? It probably is for me.
yeah. Well, and how about the audacity of maybe not just the Beatles, but those times and the way things were marketed, where you have songs like Hey Jude and Revolution, and you don't bother to put it on the album.
Right.
It's just a single and that's all.
Right. Yeah,
Uh,
I do
uh,
highly recommend. There's an instrumental. I think on the Abbey Road box set is just the instrumental backing of the B-side version of Revolution. Just even without the vocal, it just rips. I'm gonna throw that on the playlist too. Just the instrumental version is just fantastic.
and yeah, and then I'll also mention the Beach Boys with Friends. Friends was an album that was a close call for me. Didn't quite make my top 12, but I like the title track quite a lot, and definitely worth putting on my list here.
I'll throw some Monkeys in. I know you might have some Monkeys as well. I don't remember which single it was, but the B. I think Valerie was the A side. The B side is a song called. I'm sorry, Daydream Believer was the A side. The B side was a Mike Nesmith contribution called Tapioca Tundra, which is it's kind of lightweight. It's the Monkeys. Like I don't think it was designed to change the world. It doesn't. But of just a slice of weirdness. Like I just don't think that record could have come out in any year but 1968. We have major corporations taking a bet on like sort of goofy psychedelia. The world is upside down, and I think Tapioca Tundra by the Monkees is one of the best of those. I have to go back quick too because you mentioned Pressure Drop. Pressure Drop is one of the greatest songs ever recorded in any genre, but reggae had a pretty good year that year. Johnny Nash's Hold Me Tight came out. And then I don't want to act like I'm down by law and have been listening to the Tenors since 1968. I haven't, but Joe Strummer covered the Tenors' Ride Your Donkey on his solo album Earthquake Weather. It made me a big fan. Definitely dig up the original Ride Your Donkey by the Tenors, Tennors, all-time classic. Bears up. I mean, you can listen to that song 1,000 times in a row and not tire of it. It's genuinely great.
Okay, yeah. It wasn't Daydream Believer that was the A side because Daydream Believer was 67.
Hmm. All right. Well, the album that Daydream Believer is on is a not a great record. I like the Monkees. I think about as much as you can without being like a super fan. But the album they compiled it all on is '68. So
Okay, well, also in 68, then the soundtrack to Head, the movie Head,
yep.
that came out, and the Porpoise song is on my list from that. I also have Midnight Confessions by the Grassroots, Pictures of Matchstick Men by the Status Quo. Okay, going back to reggae somewhat, like I don't think Jamaican reggae, but the Equals with Police on My Back. So dance hall stuff.
Yeah, that's a Stone Cold classic. That's great.
Yeah. And the Equals, in case you didn't know, featured a young Eddie Grant, who you probably know as the Electric Avenue guy. But
But his
also,
vocal performance in "Police on My Back" is one of the best of his career. It's certainly better as a vocal performance than Electric Avenue.
yeah, and you also might know the song better as a cover version by The Clash on Sandinista.
Yeah. Which Clash, I think that's what year was Sandinista? 81? Or did we talk about it in 1980?
And yeah, it's 1980.
In 1980, yeah. Because Bank Robber came out then too. I'm just saying this because I have to be honest, I got a lot of my reggae by being a Clash fan. Like that was basically my way in. So the fact that we're talking about the Equals makes total sense. So, did we talk about Archie Bell and the Drells and the Tighten Up? Did we mention
No,
that
we
already?
have.
All right. I feel like we need to mention that record. So again, both Flick and I have worked in radio stations and we've played music for money before, and I have to say, very few things brought me more pleasure than playing the Tighten Up, or technically Tighten Up Part One, Bell from Houston, Texas. That was one of my all-time favorite songs to play at the oldie station. And I don't know if I want to make a case like it's a great all-time record, but I did put it on a couple times this week. There are not many records that are more listened to than the Tighten Up by Archie Bell and the Drells. And again, I don't want to put too much political weight on a song like a dance, essentially a dance record, but the social upheaval that you have in 1968, indulging in a little bit of escapism is okay as long as it's as good as the Tighten Up Part One by Archie Bell and the Drells. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, and let me see. I just have, I think, a couple more songs on my list that I haven't mentioned yet. Os Mutantes, the Brazilian psychedelia band in 1968, had a good album, and from that I have Amina Amina. I'm not entirely sure I'm saying that right, but anyway, that's a great song. And then also want to mention Small Faces, another album that almost made my top 12, but didn't quite do it. But definitely want to include Song of a Baker in my songs list.
Yeah, you know that Os Mutantes. I'm jealous you got that one and I forgot it. That's great. The British brand Band of Bees did a cover of it in like 2000. I think that's also pretty good. But yeah, Os Mutantes. I think David Byrne's record label had the rights to put all that out. Like there were a bunch of great reissues of their stuff. You should really dig into them and give them a shot. I think I don't know how popular they were in the U.S. during that time, but I feel like they were overlooked a little bit. I feel like they're way better than they got credit for. So before we jump into albums, we do have sort of this in between zone. Both of us want to talk about Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison, but it doesn't necessarily fit the rules, right?
Yeah, so as we've discussed in other years, or at least in 1980, when there was a potential live album that would have made somebody's list. That live albums are maybe off limits for this sort of thing because they're kind of kind of greatest hits compilations in a way, and greatest hits compilations definitely wouldn't be eligible. But you definitely have to talk about Live at Folsom Prison because it is one that if you're going to bend the rules for any album, I think this would be at the top of the list. Um, Folsom Prison is definitely a landmark album for Johnny Cash, and it's I think just a landmark live album in general. Just a great performance, and the timing was right. And like Johnny Cash's career might have just died on the vine without it, I would say.
Yeah, this is one of those records my parents used to play. Like my parents played a lot of records, many of which I thought were not that great, but there were just, Bob Dylan, Johnny Cash, Beatles, early Rolling Stones. Every once in a while they'd put one on and I would just have to run out and be like, "What are you guys listening to?" And this was one of the early ones I just grabbed onto and just would have it on constantly. Even now, I mean, it's like we'll do a Johnny Cash show and then we can be effusive about what a great artist he was. But I mean, I don't know. I just think he's a mensch. Like to go and do that, and this wasn't his first time. Like he did that through his entire career. It's not only a great album, but it's like a great example of how to be a good human being. So we deserve to give it a little bit of a little run here.
Yeah, and it really is like I think it was so important to his career because it really showcased him in a way that the studio stuff didn't do justice to it. Um, so it saved his career because it was just such a great performance, and it was really the right way to see what he was all about, I think.
Yeah, the planet was better when Johnny Cash was alive. There's no question about it. So shall we do our albums? I went first on the songs. I
Well,
would gladly defer.
Well, and we should also quickly mention another live performance. That was, of course, the year of the '68 comeback special by Elvis Presley, which, um, I'm not. I'm far from a diehard Elvis fan or anything like that. The '68 comeback special is one of those things where even if you're a casual fan, I think it's one of those things that you can't help but appreciate.
Yeah. I'm not trying to hot take or black pill here, but the Junkie XL remix of Little Less Conversation is better than the live version. I'm just saying. But you're right. It's a magnetic performance, and this was a good guy. Let's just have a moment of honesty here. Elvis became '70s, but his late '60s, Elvis, like Elvis was not. I don't know. I guess we beat up on hill culture readily. Give him his was just a hillbilly, but boy, he could bring it when he wanted to. He could. I mean, '68 special is great. He looked great. What are you gonna do? Shall we get some albums going?
Yeah. Okay. So who's starting?
You.
Okay. All right. Well, my number 12, it was really. Oh, you know what? You know what we didn't mention? I'll just throw it out there quick. Or I didn't mention. No, you know what? You're going to talk about it later, I'm pretty sure. So I'll just mention it then. So forget what I just said.
Done. Sold.
Okay. So anyway, with that, my number 12 album is SF Sorrow by the Pretty Things. Um, it happens to be the first rock opera. So, it might not be you can make the debate whether or not it's the best one, but it is the first one. I'm pretty sure anyway. And the Pretty Things got there first, and it is a great album. And we talked a little bit about psychedelia. It's great, a great example of '68 psychedelia. But I think there's more to it than just that tag. It goes beyond that. Uh, yeah, and unfortunately, the Pretty Things were not. It's kind of like the Kinks at the time, although the Kinks broke through. They had their hits early, and then just became kind of this thing that was kind of an unknown in the States. And for the Pretty Things, that was just kind of their career. They were always basically an unknown in the States. But if you're not if you're the uninitiated with the Pretty Things, I think this is a good album to get familiar with.
You play guitar. Is that opening lick to the title track "SF Sorrow Is Born" as hard to play as it sounds? Like that, just it's a great lick.
Well, just because I play guitar doesn't mean I've tried to play that. I
That's
haven't
true.
really attempted that. I'll get back to you. I'll
Yeah,
give
that's
it
some good homework because it
give
seems
it a
like that'd be
try.
tough to play. Seems very hard to play. I'm with you. All right, we're going to talk about the Byrds a good deal later, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it now. But I'm going to go with number 12. I'm going to put Notorious Byrd Brothers as my number 12. I want to make a case that there's almost nothing bad on it, and the reissue that came out in the '90s has an alternate ending for Draft Morning that I actually think is better than the original. The extended version of Going Back is better than the original. Um,
No, I disagree.
really, on both or just on Going Back?
On Going Back, I disagree strongly there.
All right. Well, I'm gonna. I'm not. It's not a hill I'm gonna die on. I even like the stuff like Moon Raga. I like even like the instrumental stuff of the extras that were on there. So I don't think there's a. I mean, it's not a great. Not everything on it is great, but taken as a whole, I think it's this album is overlooked. I think their highlights are so high that when their album doesn't have like a gigantic single on it, people are too quick to dismiss it, especially during the country period. I don't think the Byrds made an actual bad album at any point, even including that 74 reunion album, I don't think is objectively bad. But they have moments where they're transcendent. And 1968 was a great year for the Byrds. We'll talk more about it in a bit, but don't sleep on Notorious Byrd Brothers just because of the other stuff they did in '68.
You know, I noticed when you talked about the extra stuff, you didn't talk about Triad.
I didn't. Well, okay. Again, I'm not. It's a matter of taste. Would you at least concede that 1968 was a killer year for the Byrds, even if their record sales didn't show it?
Well, I think the Birds are pretty good all the way around, but you know this album didn't make my albums list. There are songs I like here. Um, it's it's not quite where I think they, you know, like I think the Birds are better at singles than albums. But we'll talk more about that as we go on. Um, Going back though, I think is absolutely great, and there's a lot I think to talk about with this album, and you know, and I do want to talk about it, even though it didn't make my list, because it is an interesting time for the Birds. David Crosby's just kind of going nuts at this point, and he ends up getting fired from the band, and I think Triad was part of that because Triad is this song about his little menage a trois that he wants to get going, and you know, like I don't think the other band members thought it was in the greatest taste,
Mm-hmm.
and and I might be inclined to agree. I mean, if you hear the song, I don't think the song is really an essential to put on the album in any case. But anyway, you know, he gets fired from the band, and Gene Clark comes back. And then later on, as we'll talk about a little bit more, Graham Parsons comes along. So yeah, '68 is a very interesting year for the Byrds. And yeah, as far as this album goes, going back, love it. I also love "Wasn't Born to Follow."
Yep.
Um, I don't like the rest of the album as much as those two. If you know, if it wasn't, I don't know. For me, it's a little bit more uneven because there's a big drop off after those two songs.
Artificial Energy, Natural Harmony, Changes Now, all those, all of them. Good, 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 good. But again, you're not dissing it. It's just not on your list.
Yeah, it's just not on my list. It's a good enough album, and you know, for me, a couple of absolute great songs.
Oh, driving around Northern California on some beautiful, when the beautiful sunset, maybe in the fall when everything's golden, listening to like Draft Morning, Wasn't Born to Follow. I tell you, there's nothing better than that. I'll take you out. I'll convince you on this one. Anyway, you're up.
All right, so my number 11 is "Bookends" by Simon and Garfunkel. Simon and Garfunkel also not necessarily great album makers, but great song crafters. Um, or I guess, maybe I should just give the credit to Paul Simon on that. But of course, can't have it without the great harmonies that they had as well. Um, and yeah, this we'll have to see as we go along. I could see this being the only time where a Simon and Garfunkel album makes my top 12. This is definitely a worthy one to do it. I think I think the way it's kind of planned out, the bookends is kind of the side one, and the side two is more of like a hodgepodge. Side two though is great. Like there's really only one down spot to it, and but side one, if you take America away from side one, I don't think it makes my list.
Save the Life of My Child is okay. It's a little cringy. Old Friends, I think, is side one. This was on my list too, and since we have overlap on our list, I'm just going to do mine now, and we'll just count this as my turn then, because I have it on my list too. I have it a little higher than you. I think I have it like number 8. I'm a big fan of Faking It, even though it has that pretentious little shopkeeper breakdown in the middle, which I could live without. There has to have been a better way to finish that record, but the record is so good it can withstand a clunker skit in the middle. I think "Faking It" is one of the more unsung Paul Simon compositions,
Yeah,
and it is a little bit cheating to throw Mrs. Robinson in from the Graduate soundtrack. Although you can't call the Graduate soundtrack a real Simon and Garfunkel record, so I guess that's a little bit of thumb on the scale. Hazy Shade of Winter and At the Zoo, to your point, like closing out that album, Mrs. Robinson, Hazy Shade of Winter, and At the Zoo, that's pretty strong. Faking It, Old Friends, America. If you have that much firepower on an album, the rest of it can be pretty bad and you can still defend picking the album.
yeah,
Unfortunately, Bookends is one that requires us to do that a little bit.
yeah. Punky's Dilemma was a down spot on side two.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. America is kind of the story of side one for me.
They were pretentious a little bit. Let's just, they were a little bit pretentious. From what I understand, like even in the early days when they were playing on the Bleecker Street, people used to mockingly sing "Hello Darkness, My Old Friend." Like Paul Simon's a little precious, but you have to have that to get the absolutely transcendent stuff he did. So I'll take
Yeah.
a couple clunkers to get the incredible rich vein of songwriting he put out in that stretch of
Well,
67 through 70.
yeah. I mean, there aren't any duds on my top 12. Like there were some solid contenders that didn't quite make my list. So there's really nothing
All killer, no filler, you're saying?
pretty close to it. Like I don't know. Definitely, I would say definitely from here on out. I think I think every album on my list is literally all killer no filler. Or
All right. Well, we disagree on some things, so let's get to. We can agree on plenty, but there's definitely I feel a hot take coming, but it won't be my hot take; it'll be yours. So you're up.
okay, okay. So you're just going to exchange your number 11 with the
Yes,
Kenta?
my
Okay,
number 8. I just went, so we're just gonna have to do that because almost I would say 70% of what remains is in both of our lists.
okay. All right. So my number 10, and yeah, that we'll have to discuss too. How 68 might be, or maybe it's just the 60s in general, where we're going to have, I think, the most agreement between us.
Because, but like you said before we did the show, and we should bring this back up, is this is the year when the album really, really came into its own. 67, I think, is the first year of the album, but like the first time music really stretched out and showed what the long player could do. 68's a pretty good contender for that.
Yeah, yeah. I guess we'll have to see how it goes. As we go along, we'll see if it really, if this was the beginning of something. But I think in 68, at this point there aren't many stones unturned. So we kind of know the story of all this stuff more than, like there might be stuff in later years where this is more your field or more my field, whereas 68 it's kind of everybody's because really good albums were pretty mainstream. They mostly got plenty of exposure. Uh, it was also a time when the British invasion was still really going on. And so you didn't have this, well, this is big in the UK, but it's not very big in the States. You had a little bit of that, but not as much as you have in later years.
All right, I'm going to. I can't remember what number you did. Your number 10. So I'll.
Well, yeah, so I'm about to do my number 10.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry. Go
That
ahead.
was just that was a little sidebar. Okay, so my number 10 is White Light, White Heat by the Velvet Underground. Of the Velvet Underground albums that feature Lou Reed, and yeah, there are some that don't. If you aren't aware, maybe Google it. I'm not going to say you're going to thank me later. But yeah, there are some Velvet Underground song or albums that do not have Lou Reed. Of the Lou Reed Velvet Underground albums, this is my least favorite, but still good enough to make my top 10. Um, love White Light, White Heat. Here She Comes Now is great. You know, it's not as end to end satisfying for me as the other three, but it is still a very good, regardless.
I have it way higher on my list, but I'm gonna now too, just so we can get it done. I can't argue the album itself, just the straight album as it was reissued in '68. I understand why you're hesitant to necessarily equate that with the fully VU albums, but I would ask you to consider like the version that's on Spotify has other material from that era that I think if they had any reasonable control over their that stuff would have been put out at that time. I do think that era was very fruitful. I think you're I understand why people don't necessarily love Sister Ray, but you should love Sister Ray. You really should.
Well, I mean, it makes my top 10 for the year. So, even though I don't love it as much, doesn't mean I don't love it. Um, but it's also interesting. It's an album where you have Sister Ray and you have The Gift, which are both very long, and it makes for an album where you only end up with six songs. So, you know, even if you like the six songs, it's still only six songs. It doesn't feel as
Yeah,
satisfying.
I think if Temptation Inside Your Heart and Hey Mr. Rain had been on there instead of The Gift, I think people would have bonded a little more easily with it. But I had this record higher because I do think this is the nasty side of Velvet Underground, and I don't think any other of their documents like yeah, there's stuff on Velvet Underground and Nico, which the subject matter is nasty and the songs have an edge to them, but like
Yeah.
this is the hard record for them, and
Hmm.
they were great at that too. And a lot
Yeah.
of what I don't like, I have to admit, I didn't love Sister Ray until I realized Joy Division loved it. And again, I was young, what are you gonna do? But like Sister Ray has been covered by both New Order and Joy Division, and that's where it kind of got beaten into my brain why that song is great. And then obviously I bonded with the original version, but um, they showed a range of what they could do here that they didn't necessarily go back to over and over, but loads of other people did. This album, if the only concession I might make is that it's maybe more important than it is great. It's certainly important enough to be a top 10 record on both of our lists, though. So that
Well,
I'll use my pick for that.
yeah, and it sounds like I'm complaining about it, but I think it's both great and important. Um, it just all I can say is it to me it's a bit of a drop down from the other three. But it's still all four of those albums are great.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think I had that as my number 7. But I put it slotted in as what number? That was my number 10. But
Yeah, number
we'll,
10.
we'll get there. It doesn't matter. Go ahead. You're up.
Okay, well, my number 9, we talked about the song already, but the album is on my list. Otis Redding's Dock of the Bay. I don't know. I won't backtrack too much on this because we've kind of touched on a lot of the things I want to say about it. It it, it it's a great place to have have the story end musically. It's also a sad place to have it end because you wonder what could have been. I think I think that would have been the case no matter what, because I think he was so great that, wherever his career ended, you'd be wanting more and you'd be really wondering where things would have gone with him. Otis Redding was just great. And and it's just too bad his career was so short.
Yeah, that's the worst part is he and Jimi Hendrix and all these John Coltrane, all these people who died in this era. They all could have been with us up until like into the 2000s easily. They were baby boomers. They should still be with us now. Well, maybe John Coltrane wasn't, but I mean, they should still be with us now, or theoretically could have been. And you wonder with the trajectory he was on, which I think you could make a case he was getting better. Like you said, even the songwriting, the performance, the fact that he was an omnivore. He did loads of great covers. He had his ear everywhere, and he was really starting to come back as really incredible, even more incredible music. And it's just a bummer. It's just a bummer. All right, I'm going to go back, and this is a really bad segue here because I don't want to go from something like holy of holies, but I debated to put this whether should put it on my song list or my album list. It's kind of a moot point. I just want to throw in. I'll put in. It was originally my number 11. Iron Butterflies in Agata Vita. I understand it's not for everybody, and I don't like drum solos. I maybe the world would be better off without most drum solos that have ever been recorded. I could even buy that too. I'm not saying this is every time I've like talked to people who really play drums, they're like, that's a bunch of like drugged out, greasy kid stuff. No real drummers care about that. So I'm not going to say it's a great drum solo from a technical point of view, but man, did I love that record as a kid. And I'm sorry that I'm not trying to turn this into the Rudy Story Hour, but when my dad was in Vietnam, he got to take a break from Vietnam. He got to go on leave to Hawaii. My mom flew out there and they met and they rented a car and they went driving around and they kept telling me all they kept doing was hearing Inagata Vita. And it's just like the greatest songs and greatest album in the world to drive around Hawaii with. So a couple of years ago, I made a special trip to rent a Jeep. I brought a full copy CD of Inagata Vita, and damn if they weren't right. It's like 50 years later since they went. I went there, and I'm telling you, it's the Koki State Park. If you drive up the mountain in a Jeep with the top down, listening to an Agata Vita on a beautiful Hawaiian day, it's going to change your life. So that's why I had to include it. I'm not saying it's necessarily a great album, but it is a great song, and it's great at doing what only music is great at doing, and it can transform your entire perspective on a place. And I had to include it. Sorry, it's just like a personal anecdote, and I'm not sure it's one of the greatest albums of 1968, but it is to me. So there you go. It's my number 11.
All right. My number 8, I knew was going to make my list, but last night I listened to it on headphones, just because I wanted to refresh myself on a few of these, and I don't think I'd ever listened to it on headphones anymore. And listening to it on headphones bumped it up a couple of spots on my list, uh, and it makes me wish that I could put it even higher on my list, but really at this point we're getting to where it's just everything is just rock solid. So I can't really go any higher than 8. But any other year, or at least most other years, I think this is a top 5 album for me, and that's Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies. Um, I absolutely love this album. As we are talking about before the show, it seems to be kind of having a revival. But I can tell you, I'm no bandwagoner. I've loved this one for a very long time. Um, and listening to it on the headphones made it even better because it is so well recorded and mixed, and and it just most importantly, the songs are there. Like, there isn't really a song on it that I don't love. Uh, well, okay, maybe one. You could probably take off Butcher's Tale as far as I'm concerned, but the rest of it I'll be happy to keep. And yeah, it's just so good. I love it so much.
Yeah, and so many artists that I love that album that I can't say that I like loved it until it sort of had its critical revival. I love Time of the Season and I love Cell 44. I liked the highlights, the stuff that everybody knows. And let's be honest, Time of the Season is one of the greatest singles to, like, oldies radio is like a lot of businesses put on oldies radio because you like can't offend anybody with rock around the clock, I guess. I mean, I'm kind of over it, but like very rarely do records come on oldie stations that are effing cool. And this is one. Like this is one where it's like I think genuinely it's one of the very few like songs still on oldies that is actually like just transcendent. I feel like the Elephant Six artists are where I got it. So right around the time when all of them were getting big is when I went back into it. So I agree, it's great. It didn't make my top 12, but it is great. There's no doubt about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and I'll say it again. I think pretty much most years it would have made my top five pretty easily.
Yeah, my original number 10 is probably the last of mine that is debatable as like maybe not the greatest of all time, but it's certainly it's on my favorites list. I lived in Chicago till I was just before I turned 14 in 1984. So if you grow up in the Chicago area in the 70s, chess records are just going to be all over the place. You're going to I think Ramsey Lewis was even on the radio there. So I heard a lot of like Muddy Water, really stuff. It's more common there. A 1988 is a little. I think it was just sort of an effort to sort of push Muddy Waters into making like a contemporary rock album, like a almost like a psychedelic record. And if they were really trying to make a psychedelic record, it doesn't work as a psychedelic record. And I'll admit that I'm guessing Muddy Waters had to be talked into doing this for a while. It does have as I just want to make love to you. I'm your hoochie coochie man. Let's spend the night together. Manish boy. I also happen to like Tomcat. That's half the record, and those are all more than just nice, listenable little ditties. Those are hard, and those are great. So I'm gonna put Electric Mud in my number 10 slot. May not be for everybody, and I think the record he made later with Johnny Winter is better. I think everybody thinks that, but boy, for Muddy Waters in 1968, I actually think it's a pretty daring step, and I think it mostly works. So I'm mentioning it. I think it's worthy of top 10. Electric Mud by Muddy Waters.
All right, my number seven. Again, we're getting pretty solid here. Lady Soul by Aretha Franklin. You know, you could almost do it for Chain of Fools alone, but there's just so much more here. I mean, it has You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, like two of her signature songs. A great version of People Get Ready. It's really end to end great. And it was recorded in New York, but of course, I think like the big breakthrough in Aretha's career is when she went to the Atlantic label, and they took her down to record in Muscle Shoals, and she was backed up by the Swampers. This album was recorded in New York, but does feature the Swampers. So wisely, they flew them up to New York to do the studio work here. But not only the Swampers are on here, also contributing some guitar work, Bobby Womack and Eric Clapton. So you have a little bit extra going on here as well. But the essential part, I definitely have to say, would be the Swampers.
So this is a little cringy as far as transition go, and I know you're going to talk about this record too, but I'm also a big fan of Aretha's cover of The Weight, and if I'm not mistaken, that has
Dwayne Allman, yeah.
Dwayne Allman on it, yeah. The Weight, of course, originally being from the band. I know you have this record higher than I do. I have it as my
Well,
number. Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
well, yeah, I'm about to talk about that next. So we're talking
Okay.
about it at the same time. Yeah, I
Okay.
have it at 6, but that's yeah.
Well, I'm almost caught up to you. I'm going back to the records I didn't do in order, and the band's music from Big Pink is my number 9. I think it's your number 6.
Yeah.
Um, it might have been my number 6, but I have to just complain here and give sort of a bad review. I wanted to go see the actual Big Pink house. It's not that far off the New York Thruway. When I was living in New York, I'm like, well, that's a perfect Saturday afternoon thing to do is drive up and see it. You can't actually see it. It's like there's this big long fence making sure you can't see it from a way away. And I think it's available only as an Airbnb. Now, the people who own that house do not owe me a free look at their property. I get all of that, but it's just kind of a killjoy thing to take the music from Big Pink and that spirit of collectivism in that house and all the great music and the sharing among friends and then make it a cash in. What a drag. However, the album itself, pretty hard to argue with. This Wheels on Fire, I Shall Be Released, Tears of Rage, The Wait. Like, if it was just an EP of those, it'd be the greatest EP ever released. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much incredible material here. I know a lot is made of the fact that we had our Americana sold to us by Canadians, but Garth Hudson was like king of that area, I think, for most of his life around Big Pink.
Well, Levon Helm was
Levon
American.
Helm. Levon
Yeah.
Helm. So anyway, yeah, I know you want to talk about it too. There's really nothing on here that isn't like foundational, good for your ears. You should have it in you. Good standard old rock and roll.
Yeah, and well, and anyway, the story of the band as far as how they were formed and how they became all Canadian. So they were, Levon Helm was the I think the original drummer of the Hawks. They were Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks originally, and I think Levon Helm was the original drummer, but Robbie Robertson joined the band, and as members needed to be replacing, he would replace them with Canadian members. So that's how they eventually became pretty much, Canadian, except for Levon Helm. Yeah. Yeah, and in the songs you didn't mention Chest Fever, by the way, which is another one I like a lot. Yeah, there isn't too much more to be said though, really. A lot of great. Of course, this came after the Basement tapes were recorded, so there's a lot of great Dylan material on here. And yeah, it's really the band when they're at their best. I mean, the story of the band isn't the happiest story, but this is when they really could have ruled the world, really.
But this album, there's something about it there's something extra on it. Like there's something transcendent about it. What they were like keyed into there and the stuff they were channeling, lots of other people make a run at, but there's something pure about this. There's something it cuts through time. I can't imagine it felt much different to listen to this record the day it came out as it does now. Like it transforms whatever space it's in. Very few records can do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is appropriate that it's titled "Music from Big Pink" because I think that time, like, it really is a great document of where they were at that time, and why this works so great is because they were all living in a shared space, just working on music constantly, and everything was really, I think, at its most pure. All of the all of the motivations were surrounded by making great music.
A lot of great albums made along the New York Thruway there. This might be the best of those two. All right, so we're both in agreement on the band. I think that means are you up or am I?
That's a good question. I have 5 more. How many more do you have?
I can have 5 more, although one of them I know that we both have in common. So, actually, I think I only have one more album on my list that you don't have. Why don't I do that, and then let's just go for it. So, do you have Astral Weeks on your list? I'm not sure that you do.
No, and okay, so that is what I was going to mention before we started the albums, because I was going to put I do have Sweet Thing on my songs list, and I forgot to mention it. So yeah, I Astral Weeks, I like it. It could have been a contender, not to paraphrase, but but yeah, I mean, really, if you Sweet Thing and Cypress Avenue, I think are my essential songs from it, and so those definitely make my songs list. Album didn't quite make my album list.
Yeah. Madam George, Ballerina, Astral Weeks. These are all. This is another just magical album. I think there were little sparkly elves hanging around, everything magic, and handing out Keebler cookies after every take. There's something on. There's just an energy to it. The songs have like an improvisational. I'm guessing It's not just a feel. I'm guessing they really were mostly just played by feel by the band together. I don't know. It just captures a moment. It captures something no record in the world ever has. It's better at that stuff than any other record has ever been. And again, we've talked enough about Van Morrison. We don't need to do that anymore.
I do have something more I want to say
All right,
about Van
all right, all
Morrison.
right. Van,
Okay,
lay it out on Van the Man.
okay. So when we had our Veed Fleece discussion,
Yeah.
I was talking about how the musicians were doing such great work on the album, but they don't they were very unsung. And then I can't like one of Van Morrison's live television appearances made it onto my YouTube feed the
Mm-hmm.
other day.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember what song it was, but I was watching it for a little bit, and he, like it was one of those situations where he has all of the light, all of, not necessarily a spotlight, but all of the light was on him, and all of the musicians are in the background and totally darkened out, and it was just like there's something to this. Like he just didn't give a really didn't care about his musicians, I don't think.
Anyway, I don't need to go in on Van Morrison. We spent plenty. A guy I'd have over to the house, but I certainly, I enjoy his record. As long as that's all I have to do to stay in his orbit,
Yeah.
we're gonna be fine. We're good.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's just the way it has to be.
Yeah. Again, have any other like if I don't think there's another year where a Van Morrison album is going to make my list other than maybe Veed and Fleece. I think 74. I'm not sure it makes it so. You could do a lot worse than Astro Weeks. You should, if you do Astro Weeks, get it in your ear.
All right. Well, my number five. Yeah. So I don't know if all of. Do we have the same top five then? We
Probably
probably
not in the
do.
same order. Probably not.
Yeah, but this is kind of amazing. This is far and away the most agreement that we've had on anything.
These are
Um,
a lock, though. As far as top fives go, these are a pretty close to a lock.
yeah, and I would say anything in my top five, or really for 1968, really anything in my top eight is almost interchangeable. Um, but my number five is I'm not even sure. Like I'm vacillating as we speak. But well, you know what? As for my number five, I'm going to go the Bird Sweethearts of the Rodeo, and the reason why I did have it four just a moment ago, and I'm dropping it to five because as I think about it now, a lot of my favorite vocal performances are the Graham Parson vocals, and those didn't really make the album. But I'm also fine with the Roger McGuinn vocals as well, so it's not going to drop it far. But because a lot of the songs here are Graham Parsons songs, it is nice to hear his vocals on them. And it's also an interesting story. So Graham Parsons joined the Byrds on this album. We're talking about Notorious Bird Brothers, which was earlier in the same year. David Crosby left the band, and then Gene Clark rejoined, and then Graham Parsons joined. And Graham Parsons really took the Byrds by storm. He was on the on the Byrds for one album, and just really just took over. And being me being a huge Graham Parsons fan, I totally get that. But it is kind of amazing what he did. Um, and yeah, it's kind of the real introduction to Graham Parsons because before that he did the International Submarine Band, which is an all right album, but this is the first really great Graham Parsons album,
Yeah,
and a
he put up with a
great
lot
Birds
of
album too.
crap. Yeah, it's just he put up with a lot of crap, and he shouldn't have had to. And think about what a weird album this is to put out in 1968. This would be a weird album for a major band to put out now. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
think of how big the Byrds
Well,
are, and they got Leuven Brothers covers on it.
yeah, it's true, but at the same time, they're already hinting at this on Notorious Bird Brothers because "Wasn't Born to Follow" is definitely along the same lines. And the there was something to like this was something, the country thing was something that I think Graham Parsons really brought it in, but there are little things here and there that are leading up to this as well, like even if you go to the Beatles on Help, we're showing a lot of fondness for country music. And
Sure.
so yeah, it wasn't I don't think it becomes a big thing without Graham Parsons, and unfortunately it didn't become a big thing with Graham Parsons necessarily. But he really was the person that ushered it in. Of course, the Eagles were the ones who cashed in on it, but he's really the one that he brought it to the canyon, basically.
I'm not the expert. I just uh, the in 1960 the Porter Wagner show was on TV, and he was wearing those awesome nudie suits. But that was a bunch of, I mean, I don't know. The Porter Wagner show reruns, you can watch them on cable now. They're on, I think it's the RFD channel on, it's only on DirecTV. It's the Orion Samuelson, who is the farm reporter from WGN in Chicago. He has his own TV network on DirecTV, and one of the pieces of programming he puts on is the Porter Wagner show. If you haven't watched that, you got to watch it. It's incredible. It's like from another planet, it's from another world. And Graham Parsons was definitely like nudge, nudge, wink, wink about some of that stuff. I don't think he was about the nudie suits. I think
No.
Graham Parsons really loved the nudie suits and really loved the expectations of country music. Like, he wasn't
Oh,
like being ironic.
well, no, not at all. I don't think Graham Parsons had it in him to be ironic. At least not about country music. Like he did it. He did it with the fervor of an evangelist. Really. He was, like he was. I don't know. He just. I think the reason why it took hold the way that it did was, in large part due to him, but because he had such conviction about it. Keith Richards, uh, when when uh, when those two guys became friends, Keith Richards totally turned on to country music, and then that became such a big part of what the Stones were doing from here on out.
Yeah, and they got didn't Graham nick Wild Horse from Keith Richards too for his trouble?
Well, he covered it.
I think he put his cover out their version out. I could be wrong. Anyway, I don't think there's any. I think I would hope everybody we're talking to right now knows this album and already has it in their repertoire. But if you do not, you really need to pause this, whatever you're doing, and you need to put that album on and just vacuum the house or do whatever it is and just soak it in and let it happen. Sweethearts of the
Yeah,
Rodeo is not just it's not Rolling Stone anointed.
and check out Gilded Palace of Sin while you're at it too.
Yeah, there are a couple of really good. Remember, I think didn't he discover Emmylou Harris after this? Like, he still had a whole other huge chapter in his career where he did just great stuff. Find his
Yeah,
cover of
well,
Love Hurts too.
yeah, I mean, well, it was after this. So after this, he takes Chris Hillman. Chris Hillman leaves the Birds, and then Hillman and Graham Parsons form the Flying Burrito Brothers. They do two great albums. One to me, Stone Cold classic, Gilded Palace of Sin, and then Burrito Deluxe. They do, so Flying Burrito Brothers. Graham Parsons is with them for two albums, and then he starts his solo career. And discovers Emmylou Harris. Emmylou Harris, again, this is somebody that he converted. Emmylou Harris was a folkie who had no interest in country music whatsoever, but converted by Graham Parsons to it and made a whole career out of it.
He was a bit of an he was a bit evangelical about his country,
Yes, very much. Yes.
and he was credible, and the world is better for it. I lied earlier. I do have an album that's in your top five that's outside of my top five, but I got the order wrong because I was been jumping around too much. So up next, even though I don't think this is next in your order, I'm going to throw it in on mine. I'm going to go here. It would have been originally my number 6. The Kinks are the Village Green Preservation Society. The only reason it's not higher is I'm not trying to hot take here, and I don't love this album as much as you do, but I know why you do, and I get it. It's missing like a signature Kinks single, which I don't expect
Mm.
them to do, but he had them. He had them lying around, and they're just not on here.
Well, I would argue that there's any number of songs that could fill that void that you're talking about. I Johnny Thunder to me is worthy of a single, and would be a signature Kink single in my mind. Picture Book is definitely could be a single. I'm gonna take a look and see what the singles actually were on this
Oh
album.
wait, I'm almost willing to turn in my music podcaster card here because I forgot that Days was released as a single in 1968.
Right, but not on the album. It's
No, but
not
that's
on the
my
album
point.
as a
That's
single.
kind of my point. Is Days is one of my favorite all-time Kink songs, and it should have been on my songs list as that's in one of my top 10 for 1968 for sure. And I don't know why I forgot it, but I did. Um, why
Yeah,
couldn't
but
Days have been on this album?
well, because again, it we talked about it with the Beatles. It's the way things were, at least in England at that time, where um, a single was a single and wasn't necessary. Why isn't Hey Jude on the White Album? It's the same thing.
Yeah, although Hey Jude did end up on Let It Be. And Days, Days is like one of those songs that fell through the cracks, not in the UK for them, but in America. I think if Days is on the American version of this album, I think there's a chance that it's a bigger hit here. And again, it should have been a bigger hit just on the merits of what it was. But I don't know what the record company thought of it. I haven't read any of the history of the record per se. But I gotta think that it underperformed in America because it was missing that big single that really the Kinks were
Oh,
great at.
no, I mean it underperformed in America because at that point, I mean, first of all, at that point, the Kinks weren't even playing to an American audience. They had not, like they stopped touring in America, and that's the big thing. Like they stopped making appearances in America because, I have to refresh myself on the details, but basically I think, were banned from America for at least a
Wow.
year.
Yeah.
Um, and then at that point, they just resigned themselves to, at least for a while. I mean, eventually they came back, obviously, but for a while they just kind of resigned themselves to not really caring about what happened in the States.
Which is it's a mixed blessing because they were in a stretch there of making some incredible records. They are very British, but they're still that doesn't mean they're not like great records. They are sort of insular for a British audience, but I don't know how. Do you think you're missing anything? I don't. I feel like I get it. I think I understand why
Yeah,
these records had to be made.
yeah, and by the way, this is my number 4, so we're not too different here. But yeah, I love the Village Green Preservation Society. Not really a song I don't like, and it's a pretty extensive track listing here, um, but not really any filler. And yeah, Days I think could have been great on the album, but at that time, something would have had to been taken off of the album in order to put it on there, and it's just not the way things were marketed at that time.
Yeah, if you have an album where you can't make room for a song like Days, you'd better have an
Well, no,
incredible album.
Well, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not saying that nobody thought they could make room for it, but again, it's that Hey Jude and Revolution are not on the White Album because those were singles, and singles were singles, albums were albums, and so Days was a single, so it was going to be on the album. There's a there's a certain like marketing. It wasn't really what you would think it would be at that time. They just figured they could sell both things, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you can't. The Kinks had a pretty great decade from their first 10 years of the Kinks' career is a very, very rich vein of music and very rewarding to go deep diving into. Again, this album is like almost like case in point of the Kinks were great at deep cuts. Like, yes, their singles are massive monsters, world changers, and those on their own are enough for them to have the love they have. But when you go back in and you go through these albums, particularly from like the first 10 years, there's just stuff in there that any other band. I think
All
we're
right.
down to only albums in common. We only have albums in common at this point. I think.
Okay, so I have three left. How many do you have left?
I also have three.
Okay. All right. So yeah, we have only albums in common. We'll see if they're in the same order. All right. So am I up first then?
Yeah, you go.
Okay. Yeah. It's again. This has been rock solid for me for a while. So it's only getting more and more solid as we go up. Um, Jimi Hendrix's Electric Ladyland is my number three, and I'm guessing it's both of our
Yep.
number threes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So yeah, it's you know most years this would be a number one. I think it's definitely a number one worthy album. I think quite a few of these that are on my list. It happens to be my third favorite Jimi Hendrix album, period. And my third favorite, especially of the ones that were released during his lifetime. But still, I don't think I have no complaints about anything in his catalog. I just you know, we mentioned earlier that I play guitar. Well, guess why that is? Because of Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
Not that I ever thought I could be him, but definitely, definitely you see somebody like that, and you're like, well, I got to at least try to do this, right?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I just you just really, especially during my teenage years, just idolized Jimi Hendrix. Um, and Yeah, again, this is somebody's last album of somebody's lifetime, like Dock of the Bay for Otis Redding. 68. We talked about the assassinations that happened in 68 in U.S. history, but this was also around this time, not necessarily the year 68. Otis Redding died, at the end of 67. Jimi Hendrix died in 1970, and so many great careers just ended early around this time, unfortunately.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, just everything that Jimi Hendrix managed to do while during his lifetime, and fortunately, he did manage to record an awful lot in such a short amount of time. Um, Definitely grateful for that, and and this was the start of where there would have been like this Electric Lady Studios. He had just purchased that, and for somebody that already spent so much time recording, he was going to have that much more access to it, and he did for a while there, and got a lot done in a short amount of time. But just put 5 more years onto that career, and what happens?
Yeah. That's a tough one. That's a really tough one because it was a state of the art studio. It still, I think, is considered one of the best studios in the world. I mean, I wouldn't know, but I'm guessing. I certainly, it was one of the coolest things in New York is to be able to walk past Electric Ladyland all the time. I think it's very interesting that when both of us were making our playlist, we both picked Burning of the Midnight Lamp as our song we picked from the album to sort of represent the album in the playlist. I think that's a very serendipitous choice. I know you hate this, but stay with me here. I'm looking right now at it on Spotify as to which songs on Electric
Oh
Ladyland are
no,
listened to the least.
I should
And
have known where you're going with
you know,
that.
what is wrong with you people? The least listened to song, from what I can tell here, other than no, it's the least listened to overall, is House Burning Down. How is that possible? How is it possible that House Burning Down is the least listened to song on there?
Well, I have a hunch, and we'll see if I'm right.
Why? Oh.
Because of the this is so and so playlist. So we'll see what the track listing is on the just
Well,
this
okay,
is
I
Jimi
get.
Hendrix.
Well, look, for most people who don't love Jimi Hendrix, this album would just be what? All along the Watchtower, Crosstown Traffic, Voodoo Child, and what?
Yeah, I think those. I don't know that there's anything else that is immediately accessible.
But you have to put in the effort on this one a little bit. It's very richly rewarded. I
Mhm.
think House Burning Down is great. I don't know why that's such a low listened to song. Burning of the Midnight Lamp, again, a little bit of a period piece, but again, he could do any of that stuff. All the stuff that was going on musically in 1968, whether it was like the electric jazz or the, like Miles Davis starting to do the electric jazz or the reggae and all that other, just the birth of all these different genres, he could do all of it already. That's the thing. It's like
Yeah,
this was just like, he basically was able to pick up whole genres he could do with it and move on to the next one. And to your point about Electric Ladyland, imagine if he'd had unlimited studio time to just continue doing that. Like, he just destroys everything on this record. He really
yeah.
does.
Yeah, and on a personal note about Burning of the Midnight Lamp, that was also the first time where that the intro to Burning of the Midnight Lamp, I figured that out on guitar just by just fooling around, and so it was just one of those things where early on in playing guitar, it was cool to just come up with something like that, while playing around, like, oh yeah, that's how that goes.
Yeah, I've never picked it up, but I would be intimidated to try to play it. But the build in Building of the Bird Nightlife, just that slow build. It's just masterful. It's absolutely masterful. It's produced beautifully, it's written beautifully, it's played beautifully. That's one of my favorite Jimi Hendrix songs. I'm very pleased that you dig it as well. There's not much more I can say about it. I don't think you can say you love like rock music if you don't love this record. I just don't think you can say that. So number two, I think we're both the same on number two as well.
Yeah, number two, Beggar's Banquet by the Rolling Stones. Rolling Stones are about to go on a tear in the next few years. So I guess this is kind of like the Towns Van Sant thing. We do have the benefit of hindsight here, in a different way. I mean, because the Towns Van Sant thing, it's just like I know from his career that he'll record the great songs that he had in '68. Like, he came on with a killer batch of songs in '68, but I know that he'll record better versions of them in coming years. Whereas we know the Rolling Stones, this is just the start of just an explosion for the next few years, where they have Beggar's Banquet and Exile and Sticky Fingers and Let It Bleed. Uh, just one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Grand Slams. And yeah, Baker's Banquet, definitely a strong start to that run.
Boy, I'm looking at it. I don't know which side is better. Because side two, Street Fighting Man, Prodigal Son, Stray Cat Blues, Factory Girl, Salt to the Earth. I mean, that's a murderer's row. But I mean, kicking off your album with Sympathy for the Devil, I don't know, man. This is pretty much untouchable stuff. This is perfect as
Yeah.
it stands.
Although, yeah, if we're going to pick nits, that might be the running order might be the thing, because I don't think starting off with Sympathy for the Devil, I don't think that that's the way to go. Um, but that's the only sort of nitpick I would have is just maybe the running order could have been a little bit different.
I could see if you started with side B and you just made Street Fighting Man the first thing you played. I think you'd be okay. Um, Sympathy for the Devil is, I mean,
It's a heavy way to start off.
Yeah, but where were the Rolling Stones ever really better than on Sympathy for the Devil? Like, what that the Rolling Stones are great at did they not do on this song at the highest possible level? The guitar
Yep.
solos are untouchable, right?
Yeah, but yeah, but I don't think that that's, I don't think that you use that as the basis for what is track one.
Sure.
Um, and it's also kind of it also kind of shows a lack of confidence because you're saying, well, this is the key track, so we're going to start off with it, um, as if people are going to check out the first track and then just going to drop out. But there's plenty of good stuff here. You could start with any number of other songs, and just have sympathy. I think Sympathy for the Devil makes a better impact later on in the album.
There's no way to put this, there's no way to satisfy everyone on this, I think. I think you could make. I mean, again, I've only seen. What's the name of the movie where they show the writing process for Street Fighting Man? It's
One
not
plus one.
on. Yeah, it's not. It's not on the internet. I've been looking for it for a long time, like trying to play it for my nephew and stuff. I can't find it
Yeah,
anywhere. It is interesting what a metamorphosis that song had. Like it did
yeah,
not start out anything like where it ended.
yeah, and it's a Jean-Luc Godard film. It was called 1.1+1. Uh, in America, it was called Sympathy for the Devil, and I think the last time it was available in the States, it was on VHS tape. I
Mm.
still have a VHS copy of it, as Sympathy for the Devil. I don't know. I don't know if it was ever on DVD, honestly.
Yeah, I don't think it was. I think it gets shown in theaters like once a decade for copyright reasons, but you're going to have to work pretty hard to find it. It is worth finding. It is fascinating. It in a way, like normally when you make the songwriting process transparent like that, you sort of start to see the band as mere mortals. I don't know if I had that feeling here. I felt like, wow, like holy cow. Like you're right, they were at the beginning of a four album run that is like unparalleled, the beginning of a grand slam, but the power they had in that moment is pretty, it's kind of humbling to watch even now, just to be able to do that. Nobody else really could do that. The fact that they did it in the same year that Jimi Hendrix is firing on all cylinders and the Beatles is firing on all cylinders, it's a pretty intense, that's a pretty intense year. That's just pretty intense shit. Are we good on Rolling Stones? Are we ready to go to number one?
Well, yeah. I'm just going to amend my statement. It was available at one point on DVD. Now, if you wanted to get that on Amazon, it would cost you $70.63.
Mm, I'd rather buy a original Cocksuckers Blues 7-inch for the money. What are you gonna do? All right, we're up to number one. You can go first.
All right. Well, my number one. You may have already guessed it because the Beatles' White Album hasn't been talked about to this point, other than to talk about how Hey Jude and Revolution weren't featured on it. So you probably have deduced that it's both of our number ones, and yeah, it's a great album. Any year that the Beatles are in the running, I'm going to tell you it's going to be hard for them not to be number one on my list. And White Album is a great album. It's I think especially a great John album because he did a lot of writing when they were in India. But yeah, I think it's still great for all of them. George definitely has his great moments, and Paul has his great moments. And it's also you also see where they're really becoming, like they're still doing it within the context of being the Beatles,
Mm-hmm.
but they're all becoming very strong individuals as well. And I don't think it's the first time you're seeing that, but it might be like the first time you're seeing it in such a strong way.
Yeah. You and I talk about this a lot about what the best Beatles record is. And everybody has their favorite, but I think you and I think of the pretty similarly. We may not have the same order, but the White Album is both of us, I'd say, top three for Beatles, and then after that, I think we both go for Rubber Soul and Revolver, right? Would those be your top
No,
three?
no, no, no,
Oh no, you're
no.
you're you're Abbey Road. You're Abbey Road, right?
Well, no. Rubber Soul and Revolver are my one and two.
Right, and then this is number three. White Album's number three.
Four.
Number four. Abbey Road is
Abbey
number three.
Road's three.
Yeah, I think those are my top four too. We might have a different order. I'm not trying to hot take Paul here. I promise not to, because the truth is, this album is the coolest I think Paul ever was. Um, I don't like Paul's little head bobbers and his little vignettes and slice of life stuff. I find all that stuff patronizing and boring usually, and some of it is on here. Like I don't ever need to hear Martha, My Dear again. But other than that, like for the trouble the Beatles had, like Ringo quit the Beatles during the recording of this album. He had to be talked back into rejoining the band to finish it because they were getting a little nasty with each other. They were recording separately. They were being competitive. The girlfriend stuff started up. Like they had a lot of pressure, and no one in human history has ever had to be the Beatles before. Like being the Beatles in 1968 had to be a surreal life. What those four guys experienced in 1968, they probably can only explain to each other and have it be understood. Like I can't imagine what it was like. So to be under in the fishbowl constantly under scrutiny, every slimy scumbag in the world trying to make a nickel off you, and somehow that brings out in them like this unbelievable period of creativity. And I do think John's work is emblematic of it. But they all really stretch what they're capable of here.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were finding refuge in the studio in a lot of those cases, though. And they had I think 2 years at this point, they had been off the road and just focusing on the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And you're seeing, like you're really seeing the fruits of that labor, and really seeing how having that focus is contributing to their output.
Yeah, the have you spent a lot of time with that 2018 edition with all the Escher House demos on it? Have you spent any time with those?
No, not much.
I have to say, like they actually during this same period they wrote Junk, Mean Mr. Mustard, Mean Mr. Mustard, Polyethylene Pam, Not Guilty, What's the New Mary Jane, Child of Nature. There's a ton of other songs, not a ton, but plenty of other songs that were available
Yeah,
at the time that ended up being great songs. Some of them on their solo careers, like just
yeah,
whatever they were doing there. It's just it's fantastic. It's
yeah. And this is a double album, and so it's just and a lot of that stuff, I have known, going back decades, knowing that material, but yeah, I mean, they were bursting at the seams of material, and it was, obviously it got to the point where that was kind of hard to manage. Obviously for George that was tough, and it all came out on All Things Must Pass, or not all of it, but a lot of it was, didn't come out until 1970 there.
Yep.
Yeah, so much stuff that it was difficult to manage it. But yeah, they were, they were prolific when they didn't have as much time to work on it. But having more time to focus on it, it was just insane.
Yeah, I have a little pet theory that John Lennon was at his peak when he started writing his like blues records. Like the closer he tried to write to towards the blues, the better the songs were. I think "Come Together" is probably the best example of it. But that really started here. "Revolution" is a perfect example of it. "Your Blues" is an example of it. "I Want You, She's So Heavy" later on was of it. It's just it begins that period where John was really sort of leaving behind the lovable mop top stuff and really going in hard on stuff that counts. And I don't know. I feel like every one of these songs on here of his in particular are just super high level, never to be reached again. I mean, just Dear Prudence alone, if that, you know what I mean? Like if he only contributed one song to it, that alone, but he did so much else. I'm a big fan of Bungalow Bill. I'm a big fan of Me and My Monkey. There's really just, I'm looking here at none of his contributions. Cry Baby Cry is great. All right, Mr. Flick, I do have to ask, where do you come down on Revolution 9?
Okay, well, I don't really know if I want to start talking about it, really.
What?
It, okay, so first of all, I do want to go back track because like to me the two best John songs are not even on the list that you just went through. Uh,
Really?
yeah, well maybe even the three because Julia to me is one of his best songs ever, and it's about his mom, and I
Yeah.
think so one of the most personal as well. Uh, I think that's one of his best songs ever. Happiness is a Warm Gun.
Yeah, you're right. On that one, I 100% agree. Yeah.
Speaking of Happiness is a Warm Gun, so you're talking about John. What something that's interesting here that he uh, he is prolific here, while at the same time, has the metaphorical monkey on his back, and Happiness is a Warm Gun is along that subject, no matter what Tori Amos would have you believe.
Sure.
Um, because the gun, I don't know if everybody is aware, but the gun in Happiness is a Warm Gun is a heroin needle. It's not a literal gun, which that's the reason why I make the mention of Tori Amos, because her cover of it seemed to be very much missing that metaphor. Um, but yeah, he's really going through a tough time in his personal life, but had so many great songs at the same time.
Are you a fan of the song Cold Turkey? Because I think the Beatles rejected it, did they not? That's sort of contemporary to this era as well.
I don't know if it would have been. I'll have to see what year he would have written that. Uh, and I'm So Tired is another one that you didn't mention. That's another good John song off of this album.
Yeah. Well,
You know, but
John gets credit for the arrangement on Obla Di Obla Da, which is a Paul head bobber, but the little light reggae arrangement that John put in there, that's pretty tight. You got to give him some credit for that too.
yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't take the bait on Revolution 9.
Come
It's
on,
just
you're not. I mean, we're not done yet. You got to answer. Are you someone who listens to it, or are you someone who doesn't?
no, no, I don't. I don't listen to it. I skip it.
Oh, to
Um,
get to good night.
no, actually, I skipped the end. I
That's right.
stopped with Cry Baby Cry.
Which is to end the album on Cry Baby Cry. That's a
That
great
would be
one.
that would be a good way to end it. But they could have put, you talk about days not being on Village Green, but Village Green doesn't have the dead spots that the White Album has at the end.
Yeah,
Um,
the Village Green isn't trying as hard.
yeah.
Revolution. All right, so if I put you on a desert island and you can only take one song, you could take Revolution 9 or Martha, My Dear. Which do you take?
Well, I'm going to take Martha, My Dear easily.
Yeah, Revolution 9 all day.
Well, that's going to be a fun time on the island.
No, it's not, because you pretty much just walk around going number nine, over and over and over again. It's one of the greatest earworms of all time. Number 9. Come on.
No, as far as earworms go, that's not a good one.
You've never been caught in the endless earworm of the intro to Revolution 9?
No, I've really I don't know how many times I've even bothered to listen to it. Probably like a handful. It's just to me, it's one of those things where if that was like if you're a completist, you want to get the bootleg that has that on there, but you
All
don't
right.
really you don't really need it.
All right, what's the most underrated song you think on the White Album?
That's tough because I don't know how they're rated really. I don't
What's
know.
the
Just
one? Long, long, long is mine. I think
yeah,
long, long, long is way, way not loved to the degree it should be.
Yeah, that's a good choice because I think if you're going to go look at underrated Beatles songs, you go to any George Harrison song that is before Abbey Road comes along. like those are always going to be the most underrated songs on the album, and so Long 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 is a definite good choice. Yeah, I'll do it by by each band member that isn't Ringo. Um, the most underrated John song, I think, is probably "Sexy Sadie." Um, the most underrated Paul song is probably "I Will." Yeah, but yeah, "Long Long Long" might be the most underrated song on the album.
Because
Period.
Piggies is good. Piggies, I mean, George's contributions here are pretty tight. Piggies is good, and While My Guitar Gently Weeps is a all-time global classic, unimpeachable. I think I would say Julia is underrated in John's career. I understand
Well,
it's
yeah, apparently, I guess I should have picked that one because apparently it's underrated. It didn't make your little
well, I
list.
mean, again, I think, but we're both agreeing that, like, if we made just a John solo record out of this era, just included the stuff that's on the Beatles albums, and then go into the Escher demos. I can't remember what the name of the original one is that he wrote that ended up becoming Jealous Guy, but the original music for Jealous Guy is, I think, one of the Escher demos. Again, I'm not a completist. I don't keep track of these things at the super detailed level, but like, just his output from 1968 would have been an incredible Beatles album on its own. There's really nothing bad from John on the record. And as far as Paul goes, I don't know. I give Paul a ton of credit here because I know Brian, the George Martin rather, did not like Rocky Raccoon. Are you kidding me? Who doesn't like Rocky Raccoon? Like, if you don't like Rocky Raccoon, buzz off. Blackbird is one of his great songwriting achievements too. Um,
Yeah,
I think Helter Skelter, come on, he has no control over the politics that get attached to that song. Helter Skelter is a great song. It's one of his best by far.
yeah, it's still a live staple, and is it's a nightly staple in his live shows.
It's got to be fun to play. Mother's Nature's Son isn't underrated, but I think there's a couple songs on here from Paul that are considered sort of slight that aren't. And now I'm not trying to hot take, and I'm not just trying to be a douche with the podcast. Can't help that part. But I like Wild Honey Pie. I don't fast forward through it. That's
Mm.
it. Now the world knows.
Yeah, I am on the other side of that one. I do have there are some dead spots for me on White Album, and it's not just Revolution 9. Uh,
Is Come and Get It from this era? Could Come and Get It theoretically been a White Album song?
well, I don't think "Come and Get It" was ever meant to be a Beatles song.
Hmm. I should probably read a little bit more about the Beatles. Um,
Yeah, it's not from these sessions, but I don't think it was ever intended to be a Beatles song.
All right. Well, I think we both agree on number one. But I think my enthusiasm for it might be a little different from you. I do feel like of all the Beatles records, this one does reward the most repeat listening. Like, I love Abbey Road, I love Revolver, I love Rubber Soul, but those are very singular experiences. You know, sort of how you're going to feel during it. Like, it has they're sort of well-worn friends. You know what I mean? It's like a familiar handshake. Whereas the White Album, every time you listen to it, particularly if you try to listen to it end to end, it shows off sort of different facets, and it's very deep. It really is. It really does reward a ton of revisiting. There's just a ton here, and there's nobody I think who's listening this far through who hasn't listened to it at least once. Everybody's got a lot of time stuck in the house. You know what I mean? Especially over the holidays coming up. Put this on in the background and just see just how many great songs jump out at you over the hour and a half it plays. It's really remarkable that way. It's really a one of a kind thing. Did we pick our next year, by the way? I'm not to jump the gun, but have we picked
Oh
something next
yeah,
year?
yeah, we should do that. I wasn't ready with the flux
Is
capacitor.
is it does it need to warm up?
Yeah, it does. It'll just take a moment.
I see. It's going to be a
Uh,
power. I expect the house lights in most of Greater Des Moines to be dimming right now as the X5000 ramps up.
all right, let's see where. I shouldn't have said that just yet. We're not quite ready, but
Well, I do know our next episodes are going to be albums of the year 2020 and songs of the year 2020. And Paul McCartney is going to have to come up at least one more time this year because we have the Christmas show, and you can't have a Christmas show without either defending or castigating Paul McCartney for Wonderful Christmas Time. I know what I'm in.
Okay, well, yeah. Christmas. I'll tell you right now, Christmas music is a huge thing for me. So I'm going to. It's going to be hard to pare my list down to anything. There's going to be plenty that I will want to talk about then.
Can I help you by suggesting you leave Wonderful Christmas Time by Paul McCartney off your list?
Well, there's a good chance that it won't make my list because there's just too much to pick from. Okay, so I have the answer from the flux capacitor.
Beep boop babu beep. What does it say?
It will be 1973. So this has worked out to where we've the first four trips we've gone to different decades each time. So this is a good thing.
Yeah, I think we're out of decades, right? Because we're not doing the 50s, are we?
No, we're starting we're doing from the album era on. So we're doing between 65 and present.
All right. Well, I claim Miggy and the Stooges' Raw Power. I'm just kidding. I know we're not claiming these things. Great. 1973 was a fine year.
Yeah. So we'll see how fun it was the next time we go down this road.
All right. So that's 1968. I mean, again, we've now had like 52 years to digest 1968. I don't think there are any like great lost albums left to come out from them. I think everybody pretty much knows what came out in 1968. So I don't necessarily think we were going into this expecting to uncover tons of gems no one's ever heard from before. But I do think a healthy debate is particularly on those big three there, the Jimmy, the Rolling Stones, and the Beatles. It's gonna be for an album to have their top three albums be the White Album, Beggar's Banquet, and Electric Ladyland. Not too many other years are going to come that correct. They're not going to swing that hard on the album chart. So 68 is a good one.
We don't want to sell them short, though, either. There's going to be plenty to talk about regardless.
Yeah, I can't wait. 1973 is going to be very exciting. I was 3 years old. I think Love the One You're With by Stephen Stills came out that year, too, if I'm not mistaken. But we'll figure it out. Good times. All right, Mr. Flick. Appreciate you as always. We'll see you at episode 63.
Yep. And then, we'll see you next week with 2020 stuff coming at you.
We'll see you then.
See you then.